And I am back with another episode of True Crime and Chill. My name is Prince Tlali, and if you are new here, hi, hello to you, and welcome. This is True Crime and Chill, where I come to tell you about some of the most shocking true crime cases you wouldn't believe actually existed. So if you want to keep chilling with me every week, hearing from me every week, I would highly recommend that you press that subscribe button and also give the video a thumbs up at the end of it. I would really appreciate that. And also leave a comment down below. Tell me what you think about the case. Tell me any thought that you may have to share about the case, but also keep it respectful. But anyway, if you are not new, welcome back. I'm back again. I didn't really post a video last week because I took a little bit of a break, but I have one for you this week, and it's quite something. I'm not gonna lie to you, it's really something. But without any further ado, let me go ahead and dive into the case, and yeah, let's get into it. But before I start, even though I haven't really done this much on a lot of my cases, I do have to give out a warning that this is going to be a very graphic case to talk about. I'm going to be describing in detail what happened to the victim, and this case does contain details of rape and violence and also murder. So if you don't want to hear any of that, if any of that is triggering to you whatsoever, please, I would recommend that you skip this video and wait for the next one that I'm going to talk about. Hopefully I'll see you in the next video. But if this one is going to be a little bit too much for you, a little bit too graphic, I would totally understand if you cannot watch this one. But I just wanted to give out that warning before we go ahead. For this episode, I'm going to tell you guys about the tragic murder of a young girl by the name of Anene Booysen. And it all happened in 2013. And when it happened in 2013, it was actually a pretty well covered case. You know, it was very popular in the media at that time. But for those of you who may not have heard of it, don't worry, I got you. I'm going to tell you all about it. But at that time, it was heavily covered. It was very popular. And it was very tragic for people to hear what happened to this 17-year-old girl. She was just 17 at that time. So Anene was born on October 30th of 1995, and she was the youngest of three siblings. She had an older brother and an older sister. They lived in the Western Cape, and she didn't really have the best upbringing. They really didn't come from a well-off family. They were just struggling to go by each day. And she didn't really grow up in a very safe environment. She lived in a dangerous environment. And on top of that, her parents were battling alcoholism. They were very much subjected to alcoholism. And it got so bad that in 1998, Anene and her siblings were taken away by social workers. So that's how bad the conditions were in that they were born into. That's how bad the environment was for them. So they ended up being taken away in 1998. So that's how bad the condition was for them. They had to be taken away from their parents, and they had to be taken away from that environment because it was just a bit too much for kids at their age. And Anene was just 3 years old at this time. So Anene and her brother were taken into foster care, and they were taken into the care of a woman by the name of Corlia Olivier. And I really couldn't find out what happened to their sister. I don't know if she also got placed in the same foster care home or if she got taken somewhere else. But according to the information that I got, Anene and her brother were the ones who were taken into the care of Corlia Olivier. And we're not really going to hear much about her siblings. I'm not really going to talk much about her siblings because there really wasn't a lot of information about them. So it's mostly going to be Anene and her foster mom and everything else that happened in the case. But yeah, her and her brother were moved into the care of Collier Olivier. But apparently, even staying with Collier was not so ideal for Anene, because it was said that Collier as well had a tendency of abusing alcohol, and when this happened, things would not be very pleasant for Anene at that house. So much so that when she's at a friend's house, she wouldn't want to go back to Collier's house. She wouldn't want to go back there because at some instances, when Collier has a male friend over, she would kick Anene out of the house and tell her that she had to find somewhere else to stay for that night or for that day because well, she had a guest that she had to entertain. So even at Collier's house, things were not that perfect. They were not that great for this girl, for Anene Booysen. And this happened to a point where in 2009, Anene finally decided that she never wanted to go back to her foster mother's house. She never wanted to go back to Collier's house. And when she was at a friend's house, she decided that she wanted to stay at the friend's house, and she actually lived there for a couple of years. Between 2009 and 2013, she stayed at the friend's house. So that long without actually seeing her foster mom or going back home should tell you just how bad things were for her at that house. So between 2009 and 2013, she stayed at a friend's house because she never wanted to go back to Collier or Lithier's house. But because Anene didn't have a good upbringing, because she wasn't raised in the best conditions, she really didn't care much about school. She really didn't care a lot about education. And because of this, she ended up dropping out of school at just the age of 15. That's when she decided that she didn't want to go to school anymore, and so she permanently dropped out of school. So she continued to live with her friend until early 2013, and after this, she then finally decided to go back to Collier's house. Collier is her foster mom, just to remind you. She went back to Collier's house eventually after so many years of living at her friend's house and not wanting to go back to that house. When she moved back, she was described to be a quiet girl. She never wanted any trouble. She kept to herself, and she didn't even go out much, even though a lot of kids her age were going out at that time. You know how teenagers are. Teenagers want to go out, they want to socialize, they want to be outside most of the time. But she wanted to stay indoors most of the time, and she was very quiet. She didn't want any trouble when she was back at Collier's house. And that's just how things were for her. The town that she lived in was called Rettasdorp. And Rettasdorp was not really much of a town that had a lot to offer to the people who lived in it. And so, because of this, a lot of people had no choice but to be subjected to crime, alcohol, and drug abuse. And you know that when you mix poverty with alcohol and substance abuse, not much good can come from that. So it wasn't a very safe environment for kids. It wasn't a very safe environment for anyone, actually, because people turned to crime to either make a living or to just, I don't know, they turned to crime because of the things that they were subjected to: substance abuse, alcohol abuse, drug abuse, and poverty as well. So Bredasdorp wasn't that much of a good place for the people that lived in it. And to even get a job in Bredasdorp was very hard. And to get a permanent job was something of a miracle because people were trying to look for piece jobs. Some couldn't get those piece jobs. So if you could get a permanent job, a well-paying permanent job, you found a miracle. That's how things were in that town back then. I don't know about now. I don't know how it is now. I haven't really researched about it now, but back then, that's how it was. So in February of 2013, Anene was now 17 years old, and she and her friends decided that they were going to go out. And they were going to go out, and she told her foster mother that, okay, listen, I'm going to go out with my friends, but I'll be back later. And she had a curfew of 10 p.m. So her foster mother, Collier Olivier, told her that, okay, fine, go out, but be back by 10. And she actually told her foster mother that they're going to go out to a bar, to hang out at a bar. And she didn't seem to have a problem with it. So it's like it was sort of just normal in this environment for kids to just even hang out at places that are supposed to be for adults. So her foster mother didn't have a problem with it. She just said, be back by 10. And Anene went out with her friends on that day of February 1st of 2013. Before they went to the bar, they stopped at a friend's house because that's where they hanged out for a little bit to drink. They were drinking at this friend's house, and they only went to the bar between 12 a.m. and 1 a.m. So they spent a lot of time at that friend's house drinking. Apparently there was a house party, so they were there. Then they went to the bar later on at 12 a.m. And so at the bar, they were joined by a lot of people they were familiar with. And I gathered that most people were the ones who came from that house party that they were at a friend's house. And among these people were two young men in particular. One by the name of Johannes Connor and another by the name of Jonathan David. So they were there, and apparently Anene had a bit of a crush on Johannes. She knew Jonathan David, but she didn't know Johannes Connor that much. But when she saw Johannes, she developed a little bit of a crush for him, and so because of this, she wanted to get close to him that night. So remember, Collier told Anene that her curfew is 10 p.m., that she was supposed to be back by 10 p.m., but now it was already midnight. So Collier was starting to ask herself where Anene could be, and so she took a male friend of hers, and they went to go look for Anene until they finally got to hear that Anene is at a bar with her friends. So she went to the bar to find Anene, and she saw her at the bar with these other kids and these other guys. And she got into a bit of an argument with Anene about the curfew thing. And Anene just told her to leave because she's just trying to have some fun, trying to hang out with her friends. And so Collier did end up leaving Anene there by herself. She went back to her house with this male friend, and Anene stayed behind with her friends. And it was said that apparently the group went their separate ways between 2 a.m. and 3 a.m. in the morning of February 2nd, 2013. And also, it was mentioned that Anene was last seen walking with Johannes Connor in the direction of a nearby construction site. And this construction, I'm sorry. Wow, some words are so hard for me to say. I'm sorry. I'm only laughing because like it's so stupid sometimes when I try to say some words. But anyway, and this construction site was heavily guarded. It had a lot of security guards, 24-hour guard patrol, and they were going in the direction of this construction site. And a lot of people said that they saw Anene with Johannes that morning. So around 3 a.m., one of the security guards was doing his usual rounds, patrolling around, trying to see if there wasn't anyone trying to squat in the construction site. He was trying to make sure that there weren't any people trying to sneak into the construction site, trying to, sleep in there for the night, like any homeless person or something like that. And he did this around 3 a.m. He was patrolling around, going around, trying to make sure that no one was there. So he saw that it was clear. He didn't find anything suspicious. He didn't find anyone squatting or trying to sleep in the construction site. So then he kept on patrolling elsewhere until he came back to the very same spot. There was a hallway between some of the construction buildings. So he came and wanted to, check again one more time between that hallway, and that's when, around 4 a.m., the security guard reported that he heard what sounded like low moaning sounds. Like someone was trying to, I don't know, scream out, but they couldn't, but so they could only moan out their sounds. And it was a very low moaning sound. He heard this and he went on to investigate and try to see what was happening right there. What that all was about. As he investigated further, that's when the security guard said that he saw a young woman lying in that passage between those two buildings or cottages, and this woman had been beaten up so badly. She looked like she was in a horrible condition, a very painful condition, and that's when he saw this, and she was moaning out. She was the one who was moaning out with that low moaning sound, but she just couldn't be loud enough. So of course, after seeing this, the guard contacted the police and as well as the ambulance, as well as the emergency services. So the police came by, and in specific, two constables came to the scene. One of them was Constable Ricardo Mertz, and the second one was Constable Josephs. I'm sorry I didn't get his surname, but his name was Constable Josephs. So as the two constables tried to investigate what was happening, they saw that the young lady was lying on her back and she had been seriously, seriously injured. And what they also saw was that her pants were taken down to her ankles and she had both her eyes bruised shut. So obviously she had been severely beaten. And when she saw the police trying to approach her, she tried to get up, but because of the extent of her injuries, she just could not get up no matter how much she tried. And so she ended up falling down and she was lying on her stomach this time. So after falling down and lying on her stomach, they saw that there was blood coming out of her rear end, and they also saw something coming out as well. And they got to see that this was an intestine. This was her intestine that was coming out of her body. But this intestine was not coming out of her stomach. It was coming in between her legs. So somewhere in between her private area. So that's how badly she had been severely injured. So when the paramedics finally arrived, they were trying to get the intestine back in her body without damaging it or without causing any infection, also to prevent further damage and infection to her intestine. And as they kept on inspecting this young woman, as they kept on inspecting her injuries, they got to see a tattoo, and the tattoo said Anene Booysen. So this was confirmed that the young woman who had been viciously attacked that night was Anene Booysen. So Anene was then taken to the hospital, and when she got taken to the hospital, they wanted to further examine her body so that they can actually go into details about her injuries. And it was discovered that her lips were bruised, they were bloody, and they were swollen, and also she had injuries all over her body. She had bruises all over her body, and it got so bad that even her ears were bleeding out. So you can try to imagine exactly what happened. Like, how could it have gotten that bad that she would get so beaten up that her intestine would have to come out of her body, not even through her stomach, but through her private area, and it got so bad that even her ears had to be bleeding. So you could just try to imagine how bad that must have been. It was also examined that certain parts of her intestinal organs were missing. Some tissue of her intestinal organs were missing, and some of these tissues were the kind that supplied her intestines with blood. And so without these missing tissues, it was almost impossible for her intestine to get any blood supply unless these um, missing intestinal parts or organs were found. So remember I said that even though her intestine was out, it wasn't out through her stomach. And this is because it was found out that she suffered so much blunt trauma to her private area that a part of her body that was separating her anal and vaginal region had been completely damaged. This part is called the perineum. So her perineum was so badly damaged that it couldn't do the function that it was supposed to. It couldn't hold her intestine in place and stop it from coming out of her body. So that's how and that's why her intestine was found on the outside, because she had suffered some very damaging injuries to her anal and vaginal area, so much so that her perineum was completely damaged and it couldn't hold in her intestine in place anymore. So after Anene was identified at the hospital as well, her foster mother, Collier Olivier, was then called to the hospital. She was transported to the hospital. And when she got there, she tried to talk to Anene to try to find out what happened to her. But Anene was slipping in and out of consciousness. But she did manage to utter a few words. And she mentioned that 6 men were involved in this. And among those men, she took out the name of Jonathan David. If you remember who Jonathan David is, Jonathan David is the friend of Johannes Connor, the guy who was last seen walking with Anene to the construction site before this happened. So, what was Jonathan doing there if Anene was hanging out with Johannes the entire time? But Anene took out his name among the people that had done this to her. So after a few hours in the hospital, it was decided that Anene needed some special care. She needed a specialist surgeon. And so because of this, she was transferred to Vista Hospital so she can be examined by a surgeon by the name of Dr. Storm Bissect. And Dr. Storm got to discover that Anene needed some surgery for her intestine to be placed back to where it belongs. and for her life to be saved. So because of this, Anene was then transferred again to another hospital, a hospital called Tygerberg Hospital. And at this hospital, she was being attended to by another surgeon by the name of Dr. Liesel Taylor. But when Dr. Taylor got into the room that Anene was placed in, she started to notice the smell of decomposition. And this was coming from Anene's intestine. And so she knew that it was too late at this point, that anything they would try to do, any form of surgery, was going to be of no result because her intestine had already started to decompose. And so what they did was they just placed Anene in her own booth and they were just trying to stabilize her. And I'm guessing at this time they were just waiting for the worst. They were just waiting for Anene to just finally give in to her injuries because it was close to impossible to save her life at this point. So later that night, around 9 p.m., unfortunately, Anene Booysen did give in to her injuries and she ended up passing away. And this was so sad because she passed away alone because her foster mother was being taken to Tygerberg Hospital where she was going to be treated for her injuries. But on her way there, that's when Anene gave in to her injuries and sadly passed away. So she passed away with no one by her side. It's just so tragic to think about, and she did not deserve any of this. But just like that, her life had been taken. And the doctors who examined Anene's body, they got to see that whatever she went through, even if it was sexual assault, they agreed at first that yes, she did get sexually assaulted, but the type of sexual assault that she had to experience went way beyond forced penetration. Like it wasn't the conventional way of sexual assaulting someone. Something had to be used to give her the kind of injuries that she had. Something had to be used to damage her private area the way it was. And so they were just trying to figure out what could have happened, what could have been used. And they all agreed that there had to be some extremely forced, blunt trauma to get these types of injuries out of her. The investigation started while Anene was still in hospital. And so at the crime scene, what was found was a steel pipe, a couple of rocks, and some sticks at the crime scene. And they were all covered in a little bit of blood. But what was so strange about it was the fact that it was not a lot of blood, which sounds very weird if you think about it, because the amount of damage that she has sustained, the amount of injuries that she has sustained, you would think that there would be a lot of blood at the scene. But the rocks, the sticks, and as well as the steel pipe didn't really have a lot of blood on them. So could she have been dragged there? Could this have happened somewhere else and then she got taken to the construction site? Or I don't know what really happened. Because you would assume that there would be a lot of blood in that crime scene, but there wasn't. So Anene had a glass that she was using at the party for for her drinks. And this glass was found broken near the scene, nearby the crime scene. It was found, and also what was found were some human tissues. And remember, I said that Anene's intestine was said to be missing a couple of parts of itself. So these tissues that were found on the crime scene, the human tissue that were found on the crime scene, they were taken and they were studied, they were tested, and they all confirmed to have been belonging to the intestine of Anene Booysen. Also, like I said, her vaginal and anal area had been so damaged that even her perineum was extremely damaged. And it was also concluded that for that to happen, she had to have suffered some extreme blunt force trauma. And it was also concluded that whoever did this to her, these people, if it were more than one people, these people had to make her suffer. They made her suffer. They wanted her to suffer. And so they had to apply a lot of force to get this much damage out of her. So when the police kept on investigating more, they got to find out that she was at a party a couple of hours before she was murdered. And they got to question every single person who attended the party. They got to talk to her friends, and they got to find out a lot of things. And They wanted to solve this crime so much that they even got assistance from the police from other units. And so they tried to gather as much resources as they could to try to find out what actually happened to Anene that day. So they interviewed a lot of the people that were at the party, a lot of her friends, and so a lot of people got to know what happened to Anene that night. One of the officers that got involved in the case was a sexual assault officer from the unit of Hermanus, and as she kept on investigating this, she got to find out that the most common name that kept popping out of people's mouths whenever they're being interviewed or interrogated about this was the name of Johannes Connor, because people were saying that he was the last one to be seen with Anene. He was the one seen walking with Anene in the direction of that construction site. So this got to raise a little bit of questions, a little bit of suspicion of Johannes Connor to try to find out what involvement he could possibly have in this case. The police went to Johannes Connor's house on the Sunday after Anene was killed to try to question him about his whereabouts before the incident happened, to try to question him about his relationship with Anene. And as they kept on trying to ask him more questions, the response he gave was that he left Anene outside the bar that night before everyone got separated. He left her there and he called her foster mother, Collier Olivier, saying that she should come fetch Anene because Anene was very drunk at that party. But I wonder if they got to question Collier about this. I wonder if they did go to Collier to confirm if what Johannes was saying was actually the truth. Because if he was bringing her into this, they had to try somehow, right, to just try to get the truth or try to get a confirmation that indeed he did call her to come fetch Anene, but he doesn't know what happened after that. So I didn't get much information about it, but that's just a question that I had in my head, you know. But then the officers saw some scarring on Johannes's body. They saw some scarring on his face. They saw some bruising on his knuckles. They saw some scarring on his arms. And so they wanted to know about that. They wanted to know what could have caused so much scarring on him. And he said that he had no idea. He didn't know where these injuries came from. He didn't know why his knuckles were bruised. I mean, obviously, you know that when a person gets into a fight with someone or when a person hits someone, at some point there's going to be some bruising on their knuckles, right? But he had no idea where these injuries were coming from. And so the police were just starting to get a little bit suspicious of this guy. Jonathan David, a friend of Johannes Connor, was also questioned about this, and he said that he left the party around 12 a.m. and he went home. And even though the other kids at the party were also interviewed and questioned about what they saw that night, a lot of them tried to lie to protect Johannes. A lot of them tried to make it seem as if like Johannes was never seen with Anene. He never walked to the construction site with her. But there were those who came forth and told the actual truth that no, he was the last one to be seen walking with her, and he was the one who she hanged out with the most at the party. Because if you remember, she did have a little bit of a crush on him. So obviously, she was going to try to be as close to him as she could at that party. And another thing that the police found at the crime scene was a hat. And it was said that this hat belonged to Johannes Connor. And so this got to raise the suspicion of him a lot more now. Because if he wasn't with her, if he left her outside the bar, then why in the world was his hat at the crime scene? That was also raising a lot of suspicion. So now the police were considering him as a possible suspect. So they wanted to look very closely at him, to be on the lookout for this guy. But of course, Johannes refused. He denied that this hat belonged to him. But come on. I mean, if more than one person confirms that something actually belongs to someone, who would you believe? The person who refuses that that particular item belongs to them, or the many people who actually say, yeah, it does? But he denied that the hat was his. But a lot of people confirmed that that was Johannes's hat at the crime scene. So the case was heavily covered in the media, like I mentioned in the beginning. But because the police were not giving out a lot of details, they weren't very specific in their comments. There was a lot of miswording used. And when the media covered the case, a lot of information was just thrown out there, and a lot of things were taken very much into exaggeration. So much so that when the public heard about this, they just broke into an uproar. Like it was just massive chaos when they learned about this. And all because that a little bit of exaggeration was used when the media covered this case. So since the police didn't give out a lot of information about what happened, a lot was left to the imagination of the media and the people who knew about it. So people were creating their own images, their own stories of what happened to Anene that night. So investigations went on until the 8th of February in 2013, and Jonathan David, Johannes Connor, and an unknown man were arrested in suspicion of sexually assaulting, and murdering Anene Booysen. On the 10th of February, Johannes Connor was questioned about what happened to Anene that night, and finally he ended up confessing that he was with Anene when she was attacked. He went on to say that he was with her at the construction site, and when they were together, they were kissing. They ended up kissing, and it went so far that he wanted to have sex with her, but Anene refused to have sex with him. And because of this, he got angry and he started to beat her up. And when she fell down, he started to kick her until she stopped moving. And then when she stopped moving, that's when he finally sexually assaulted her. But he also said that he had nothing to do with the murder of Anene. He's not the one responsible for it. He said that after he raped her, he left her there hoping that she would pass out and forget about what happened that night. So he was only admitting to the guilt of rape, but he wasn't really admitting to being the one responsible for causing that much damage, so much so that Anene died. He's not the one responsible for it. That's what he was saying, but he admitted to being the one who raped Anene. But as I was listening to the podcast by True Crime South Africa about this case, it was mentioned that there was a theory that was, going around. And the theory that they had was that in that 35 minutes before the security guard found Anene's body, a lot could have happened. It was theorized that yes, Johannes could have beaten her up, sexually assaulted her, but he could have also allowed another gang of men to do the same thing to her. Because remember, Anene mentioned at the hospital that there were 6 men involved in what happened to her. And so maybe these 6 men were with Johannes and they allowed him to do what he did, and then they did the same to her, and then they ended up beating her to a point where she got those many injuries. So when I was listening to the podcast by True Crime South Africa, I got to think of it like, okay, maybe it does make a lot of sense. Because why would she just mention that there were 6 men who did this to her out of the blue and it wasn't even the truth? Why? What reason would she have to lie? So it made a little bit of some sense if you think about it. But even though there wasn't enough evidence to suggest that there could have been more people in that crime scene, more people involved in what happened to Anene Booysen, there was enough evidence to charge Johannes Connor of rape and murder. And so in 2013, he was charged, but he only pleaded guilty to the charge of rape, and he didn't really admit to the charge of murdering Anene Booysen. His trial began officially in October of 2013, and the state brought about 20 witnesses to come and testify in the case, but there wasn't really a lot of physical evidence to actually suggest that Johannes is the one who not only sexually assaulted Anene, but also murdered her as well, is the one who was responsible for her murder as well. But yeah, there was just a lot of circumstantial evidence and not a lot of physical evidence. And so his defense relied heavily on that fact that there's not much evidence, but the case went on anyway. And it wasn't really hard to believe that he could have killed. He could have been the one who gave her that um, amount of damage that it could end up killing her. It wasn't really hard to believe that he raped her and beat her up extremely to the point of getting those kind of damages to her body and leaving her there for dead. It wasn't really that much, difficult to believe. But in the end of it all, Johannes Connor was found guilty of both charges of rape and the murder of Anene Booysen. But I'm going to be honest with you, a lot of people in the community believed that he was innocent. They actually were supporting him in this, and they were saying that there wasn't enough evidence to suggest that he is the one who was responsible for this. I don't know why, I don't know how, but people just, they were behind him, they stood behind him, and it was really tragic to think about. It was so sickening to think about, actually, that people would think that someone like him, after admitting that he had raped her, is not responsible for killing her. It was really strange. His sentencing began on October 30th, and I think this was really some poetic justice, because on October 30th, this was supposed to be Anene Booysen's 18th birthday. And on this day, Johannes Connor was sentenced to 2 life sentences for both charges. So it was a life sentence for each charge. So on her 18th birthday, the person who was accused of being responsible for doing this to her, for taking her life in the most brutal way you could ever imagine, was given a sentence that was worthy of justice for Anene Booysen. But again, a lot of people believed that due to the fact that there wasn't a lot of physical evidence to suggest that Johannes could have been the only one who did this, a lot of people still believe that, yeah, justice could be served, but is it really? Because the real killers or the other killers involved in this could still be out there, and only one of them could be in prison. Only one of them had been arrested. Only one of them had been convicted. The others could still be out there if Anene did say that a lot of people were involved, like 6 men were involved in this. So, yes, you could say that justice was served, but was it fully served for the rape and murder of Anene Booysen? I leave that question to you. But I personally am very conflicted about this whole thing. I personally believe that there was more to this case than meets the eye. I personally believe that if Anene mentioned 6 men, then there were 6 men. And so because of this, only one person was arrested, only one person was put in prison, and justice may not have been fully served for her. So I'm very conflicted, but I'm very heartbroken as well that a 17-year-old girl had to be murdered in this way. A 17-year-old girl who just wanted to live her life, who just wanted to do the best that she could, was just brutally murdered in this way. But rest in peace to Anene Booysen, and I don't know what else I could say about it, because she was even by herself when she died. No one was there beside her. Her biological parents, they were not involved in her life that much after she got taken away. And since they were not involved, I don't really think they knew. I don't even know. I couldn't gather if they were still alive when it happened. I couldn't gather if they got to be notified of it. But all I know was that Anene Booysen died by herself. She was alone. No one was there. And so this must have been so heartbreaking for her to just go like that. But rest in peace to Anene Booysen. And yeah, that's all I have for you guys for this case. So thank you guys for being with me to the end of the video. I really appreciate it. And again, if you are new here and you want to keep on hearing from me when I upload a new video, please do subscribe to the channel, press the like button, show me some appreciation. I would really love it. I would really appreciate it if you just supported my channel by pressing that like button, and comment down below what you think. And yeah, also share the video, guys. Let people know about True Crime and Chill, so they can also chill with us whenever we talk about these things. But with that being said, I am Prince Tlali, and I will see you guys again in another video. And please be safe, enjoy the rest of your weekend, and yeah, I will see you guys another time.